The two goals for today, one, we're going to see if ratios are proportional, so we're going to introduce this word. And second thing is, when we're finding out if they're proportional, we're going to find something called the constant of proportionality. Okay, and that's abbreviated a lot of times with the letter K. Okay, a quick review of some important rates, just some things to look out for when you're outside an application to some ratios and rates. Okay, so when you're at the store, you may see things sold dollars per pound or dollars per ounce. When you're in the car, you'll see the speed limit signs in miles per hour. You'll see gas mileage in miles per gallon. And when you're talking about money, about getting paid, sometimes you'll see things like dollars per hour or dollars per day. Okay, let's do 2 unit rate questions as review. Okay, when you're looking at unit rate, you really want to pay attention to the question, not necessarily the order in the original problem. Okay, so I'm looking at this question. How much would I pay for 1 pound? I'm trying to find out how much for 1 pound. Okay, so whatever the thing I'm trying to find out one of, that's going to be my denominator. Okay, the other unit is dollars. Okay, so now I can read the problem. 0.3 pounds, so that's going to go in my denominator. And it was $1.43. Okay, so I would type this in my calculator, 1.43 divided by 0.3. And here I get 4.766, and that 6 is actually repeating. Okay, but we're talking about money. Whenever you're talking about money, you're going to round that to the hundredths place. Okay, so that is either going to be $4.76 or $4.77, depending on the number next to it. Okay, the number next to it's 5 or higher, so that's going to bump up to $4.77. So it's $4.77 for 1 pound. Okay, again, let's look at this question. You're talking about reading one entire book. Okay, I'm looking for how long to read one book, so the book is going to go in the denominator. Okay, whatever I'm looking for one of is my denominator. Okay, and the other unit in this problem is hours. Okay, so reading the problem, 8/10 of the book in 6 hours. So you're going to do 6 divided by 0.8. And it looks like it'll take you 7.5 hours to read that book. All right, now today we're going to talk about proportions. First definition for proportion, ratios are proportional if you get a constant number when you divide them. Okay, and then to write this as an equation, okay, you have to write this equation down. Y divided by x, so that's what the left side says you're going to divide. And you see if you get a constant. Okay, they use the letter K for constant. Okay, so this is one equation or one formula that you're going to have to remember. Okay, Y divided by x equals K. You divide, and you see if you get a constant number. You see if you keep getting the same number. Okay, here's an example. Okay, so again, reading the question at the very bottom. Is the cost proportional to the weight? Okay, so we're going to compare the cost to the weight. Okay, and when we just made that formula on the last page, the y is the numerator, the x is the denominator. Okay, it's always y over x. That's the formula. Y over x equals k. Okay, so in our table, the cost is going to be the y values, the weight is going to be the x values. All right, so to tell if this is a proportion, we're going to make another column on this table. Okay, so underneath it, we're going to do the y values divided by the x values, and we're going to write down what we get each time. Okay, so for these first two values, you have to type in the y value first. Okay, so you're going to do 5 divided by 12.5. Okay, you have to make sure you're doing that in the right order. 5 divided by 12.5 is 0.4. Okay, so you're going to go on each spot in this table, and you're going to do the same thing. You're going to do the y values first. So 4 divided by 10, that's 0.4 also. 2 divided by 5 is 0.4. And check this last one in your calculator. 3.20 divided by 8. Well, that's still 0.4. Okay, so we say, yes, this is a proportion because we kept getting that same number over and over again. That number that we got over and over, that's called the constant of proportionality. So yes, this is a proportion. The constant of proportionality is 0.4. Or we say that k is 0.4. Yes, I should say y divided by x equals k up in that table. So y divided by x equals 0.4. All right, let's look at the same problem, but in a slightly different way. Okay, so here's another way to think about proportion. Okay, this is if you know the constant. Okay, so in the last problem, we knew the constant. We figured it out. It's 0.4. Okay. This equation or this formula to write on the bottom, what it says is you multiply the constant times the x values. And it gives you the y values. Again, that formula is something you have to memorize. Y equals k times x. Okay, so let's look at that same exact problem that we just did. We already knew that the constant was 0.4. Okay. Again, we're comparing cost to the weight. Okay, so that order, I'm going to write that on the side. Cost was first to weight. The cost is the y, and the weight is the x. Cost is the y, the weight is the x. Okay, so what that last formula showed us, if we take any of these x values on top and we multiply them by 0.4, we should get the numbers on the bottom. Okay, so let's try this first one out. If we do 12.5 times 0.4, yep, that works. We get 5. Okay, so we'll go through the table. If we do 10 times 0.4, yep, that works. 5 times 0.4 gives us 2, and then 8 times 0.4 gives us 3.20. Okay, so yes, this is a proportion. If we multiply the x values by 0.4, we get the y values. Okay, so here we can also write this as, instead of y equals kx, we can plug in the k because we know what the constant was. So we can say that y equals 0.4x. Okay, so let's try to look at 2 examples of this, and then you can try a couple. Okay, so looking at this table and the question, you're comparing the cost to the weight. Okay, it's very important that you pick out that order, because that'll tell you which one is the y and which one is the x. So always y over x equals the constant. Okay, so the cost is the y, the weight is the x. Okay, I'm going to make a new part of this table at the bottom, just telling me what these numbers are. I'm going to take all the y's and divide by the x's. Okay, so this first one, the y is 2.50. So 2.50 divided by 2. You get 1.25. 8.75 divided by 7. 1.25. Now you do have to keep going. You have to check all parts of this table because you want to make sure they are all the same. Okay, 11.25 divided by 9. Yep, that still works. And then the last 12.50 divided by 10. Okay, so yes, this is a proportion. All of those numbers are the same. That's called the constant. Yes, the constant is 1.25. Okay, now there are two ways that we can write an equation for this table. Okay. There are two formulas that you have to remember. The first formula, y divided by x equals k. Well, you're going to take that formula now, and you just figured out the constant. So you're going to plug that into the formula. Okay, so y divided by x equals 1.25. Okay, that's one way you can write an equation for that table. Okay, or you can use the other formula. Okay, you have to memorize both. Y equals kx. Instead of a k, I'm going to put in that number we found, 1.25 x. Okay, so both of these equations are valid for that table. First one says that we divided and we got 1.25. The second one says we can multiply 1.25 times x and it'll give us the y's. All right, here's our second example. We're looking at the miles per gallon. Remember, per means divide. Miles per, okay, that little division bar is per gallon. Okay, so the top one, the miles, is the y. The gallons is the x. Okay, I have to look at these units so I can label the table. Miles is the y value, and the gallons is the x value. All right, so let's check if this is a proportion. Let's do y divided by x and see if we get a constant each time. All right, so y is 54. 54 divided by 2 is 27. Okay, check that second one in your calculator. 135 divided by 5. Okay, that's 27. So far, so good, but we have to check them all. 289 divided by 7. I'm getting like 41.28. And then those numbers keep going on in my calculator. I am done. I do not have to check the rest because I know this is not a proportion. They're not all the same this time. I'll check the last one anyway. 216 divided by 8 is 27. Okay, so that works. But it's not a proportion because of this part of the table. They are not all the same. So is this a proportion? No, because there is no constant. Okay, now on the next page you have 2 to try. I also left some challenge ones if you finish those early. Okay. But just to recap, you have to read the question to see how you're comparing pay proportional to hours. That'll help you determine the y and the x. Okay. And then you got to use the formula y over x equals k to see if it's a proportion. And then for part B, there are 2 ways to write an equation. Okay, there are 2 formulas that you have to memorize to write an equation. So go ahead, pause the video and see if you can do this one. Okay, hopefully you figured out that the dollars is y, the hours is x. Dollars is y, hours is x. When you divide, you get a constant of 33. So yes, that was a proportion. The constant is 33. Okay. Now for the equation, there's 2 ways you can write it. Okay, you can use y over x equals k, or you can use y equals kx. And those 2 formulas you have to memorize. Okay, and then we're just going to instead of a k, write the 33 that we just figured out. Okay, so the first way you can write y divided by x equals 33. Or the second way you can write it, y equals 33x. Okay, and as you try this last one, just be careful. This first part of the table, you cannot divide 0 divided by 0. If you can't divide by 0 in math, you'll get an error message. Okay, so check if this last one is a proportion. Okay, this one is a proportion. Your constant is 11. And your two equations you could have written, y over x equals 11 or y equals 11x.